Afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. Welcome to Attire Seminar. Today is the 24th of November, a few days before the year end, and I can see how the energy is raining. Many people, energy is raining, and hopefully today we'll be able to tap into something that has to do with energy draining, belonging, and all that. So my name is Minga Congo. I'm a Junior Research Fellow at the Institute for Humanity in Africa here at HUMA. And we'll be joined by Dr. Lireko Qhobela. She's also a Junior Research Fellow at the Africa Ethic at HUMA-Institute for Humanity. She holds a PhD in drama from the University of Stellenbosch. And she was previously a PhD fellow at the Center for Study of the Afterlife of Violence and Reparative Quests. She holds a master's in drama therapy from University of Witwatersrand. And her previous work sought to understand how applied drama and theater practitioners experience their practice within post-apartheid contexts. The project was inspired by a desire to inquire about mental and emotional well-being of South African actors. Other research interests include embodied history, place, space, performance, and well-being. So Dr. Qhobela, she's not just a research fellow here, she's also a drama therapist. She's a practitioner. She has a practice office in Kenilworth, if I'm not mistaken. So today she's going to take us through a journey of the idea of belonging, rejection, burnout, through the lens of art. She's going to speak about violence because the title of today is Performing Art, or Performing AI in Africa, Threading the Link of Violence and their Impact on Mental Health. This is what kind of like a burning issue that we all subjected to, mental health. Without spending more time on dwelling on much, I'm going to open the floor to allow Lireko to speak for a few minutes, and then we'll open the floor for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for being here. I have never envied being on this side of the room ever. So yeah, I really appreciate you holding the space with me. So I've been with HUMA for about 5, maybe 6 months now, since July. 5. And yeah, the research, like most of us with AI, it's really quite, it's like, we're all sort of finding our way. So what I'm presenting today are thoughts. It's not necessarily like a nicely tied, neat, bow packaged thing, but the invitation is that you think with me, which is why the doodling up there and little light bulbs are sort of like trying to capture what the experience so far in the 5 months that I've been here has been. And yeah, let me begin. And also the title has shifted, I think. I don't know which poster went out, but anyway, this is current thing, so we'll stay here for a while. So the one thing I've been struggling to do as a drama therapist interested in research is practice. This is in part due to the paucity of local theories that help us understand the unique experiences of African people. The paucity lies not in psychology per se. In fact, African psychology has made more strides in trying to locate psychological practice of and by Africans than the field of creative art therapies, which is my field. In a conversation I had with Prof. Divine earlier this semester, I learned that no selfie goes without a cost. The data centers require water to cool down with every load of data we send his way. I learned that, I quote, not from Prof, but from Eke Wakunuma and Akintoye, apologize for the butchering. Homegrown experts are increasingly establishing technology spaces similar to the US Silicon Valley and Silicon Wadi in Israel. Most of these tech spaces are named as Silicon Savannah in Kenya, Sheba or Shebe Valley in Ethiopia, and Yabakon Valley in Nigeria, end quote. From the same authors, I continued to learn that there are, I quote again, substantial socio-economic, social, cultural, and organizational challenges that undermine the adoption and implementation of AI across the continent. This includes lack of digital infrastructure, education, inadequate data, public policies, and funding, end quote. A Western import designed and developed with AI is a Western import designed and developed with mainly Western values, yet the technology is expected to be adopted and used in much similar ways in the global north. This is despite research showing that AI is not neutral, therefore suggesting that use as well as social and ethical considerations will differ depending on geographical locale, cultural and social and political norms, as well as economic standing. It seems as though Africa is in reactionary mode, receiving so-called good from the north and forced to adapt and be responsible. The diversity of our landscapes complicates how we respond to AI. Hua says that Africa scores low on AI readiness and will need international assistance. If context and ethics are anything to go by, then the idea of foreign aid, especially of a technology that already comes from the north, is a problem. This is my opinion. How then do we adopt or develop rather Afrocentric approaches to unknown traumas? And what about the impact of AI data centers on well-being in Africa? Knowing all this, I asked myself, why is a drama therapist interested in AI research? It's only that the creative art therapies have incorporated the use of technology, mostly for remote clients using text-based drama therapy processes, but they do not consider some of the implications of using AI. My interest in research is to contextualize my drama therapy practice within the African context, to encourage students and researchers to explore and speak to their own experiences. Such an endeavor also paves way for preparing practitioners for the challenges of contemporary Africa. So this current draft or web of thoughts is preliminary to understanding the kinds of experiences that impact on Africa's mental health in relationship to AI. Slide. Oh, they already moved. Big. Okay, so thought processes, one, front stage and backstage, performing AI in Africa. To define the socio-technical performance of AI in Africa, I briefly draw on Owen Goffman's dramaturgy of front stage and backstage, terms he borrows from theater and performance to explain tensions and contradictions that occur in public life. Goffman allows us to think about AI within the frame of dramaturgy, a theatrical lens which takes into account the ways in which the presence of AI in Africa performs. How does it present itself and its activities to the rest of the world? How does this presence guide the ways in which it wishes to be perceived? In this context, AI is the protagonist, the main character. We are both audience and theater makers involved in its performance. Depending on which side of the curtain one views AI, its performance is either full of visible drama and action, jam-packed with emotional expressions spanning from excitement to betrayal, and even fear. On the other side is where the stage hands live, where the props and set designs are tucked away from the general public. This includes the niggly bits concerning ethics, well-being, governance, and privacy. Like in theater, the front stage thrives on visibility. It is where the action takes place, where protagonists and antagonists encounter one another, characters fall in love, they go to war, celebrate life, experiences highs and lows. The front stage is well lit. We can see the action and we invest a great deal of emotion as we take part in it. For Goffman, the social interactions that happen in the front stage can be seen through three elements. There's a setting, an appearance, and a manner or a set of behaviors that manifest in action. In this series of thoughts, AI is the front stage, or at least it dominates it. The setting is the African context, and the behaviors associated with this performance or its performance are those that strive to develop technological advancement, the kind that can compete with other players around the globe. The evidence for these behaviors varies from sector to sector, such as healthcare sector, finance, retail, e-commerce, security and governance, or information, social media, broadcasting, all of that, transportation and logistics. As a drama therapist, I gravitate towards the psychodramatic permutations of how AI affects mental health. And what I'm learning so far is that within the field of psychology, the front stage is mainly preoccupied with access to mental health using AI tools. For instance, a report by Ajiche Bodo and Oguni states that, I quote, AI is a transformative tool in mental health care, especially in low resource settings like Africa. It leverages data from various sources, including text, audio, and behavioral patterns to analyze mental health trends, identify at-risk individuals, and deliver personalized interventions. It can revolutionize mental health care across sub-Saharan Africa by providing scalable, cost-effective solutions. AI can be used to develop diagnostic tools, enhance telemedicine services, and offer self-help interventions through mobile applications. In addition to offering scalable solutions, AI has the potential to provide personalized mental health care. It can analyze large data sets through machine learning algorithms to detect patterns and predict mental health outcomes, enabling earlier interventions and more tailored treatments. In South Africa, the Siyakhula app uses AI algorithms to help users monitor their mental health. I haven't actually explored the Siyakhula app, so if there are questions about it, I need to do my own research as well. At the same time, similar projects across the continent offer AI-based cognitive behavioral therapy interventions that can be customized to individual needs, end quote. Challenges such as poor tech infrastructure in rural areas and the lack of region-specific AI models that account for language, culture, and socioeconomic conditions are also noted by the authors. But little is said about security, the well-being of AI developers, privacy, and environmental costs. The front stage response of how AI could mitigate challenges of mental health access in rural areas is to employ mobile technology. But as we know, AI presents a lot of contradictions as it relates to sustainability and ecological health. It's a double-edged sword where on one hand, there's a benefit of using it, so much so that it needs to be rolled out to the people who need it. But on the other, it negatively impacts the environment. While in search of my place in AI research, I was obsessed with digital waste for a very long time, until I came across two online documentaries that covered the lived experiences of AI annotators in Kenya. The one is called Training AI Takes Heavy Toll on Kenyans Working for $2 an Hour. And the other is How Big AI Companies Exploit Data Workers in Kenya. The latter interviewed about a dozen data workers in Nairobi, and their stories, on which I will later elaborate, were a unique example of a consequence of the advancement of AI. The documentaries not only covered the socioeconomic exploitation of Africans, but also highlighted the impact that AI annotation has on their mental health. These quieter stories, which are not foregrounded in the front stage of AI performance, I relegate to the backstage. They join the cluster of behaviors which are preoccupied with the human and the natural world. For the most part, the struggles to negotiate personal freedoms, dignity, and equality fall to the backstage. The backstage in theater is where real life happens. Actors and stagehands move swiftly in the dark while the main action happens in the front. The backstage houses sets, props, costumes, and are systematically placed for a smooth running of the show. It's worth noting that the environment of the backstage can be quite dangerous, but because maneuvering props can be physically taxing. There's a lot of electrical equipment, exposure to harsh lighting and temperatures, and other factors that can lead to injury. Stagehands wear black so that they go undetected or unnoticed as they assist with scene changes both on and off stage. The movement backstage is done quietly so that the main show goes on undisturbed. I cite Eke and Akintoye again, saying that while, I quote, tech spaces and hubs are focused on using AI to meet local challenges such as poverty, illiteracy, famine, corruption, environmental disasters, terrorism, and health crises in the front stage, components of the backstage, namely the ethical, legal, and social cultural implications of AI in Africa, have largely been ignored. And I add that the psychological implications too have been ignored. People's contextual realities and local experiences need to be considered when developing ethics and psychological interventions. So in the case of the Kenyan AI annotators, the sense of invisibility and mystery opens a space to interrogate how the backstage accommodates or neglects psychological well-being of the human. One might even consider how this plays to the living history of the colonial intrusion, by how Africans are outsourced for labor under poor economic and living conditions. So, what do AI annotators do? When complex data is difficult for AI machines to detect, annotators teach the AI to identify and categorize the information. In other words, humans train the machine to recognize objects and other abstract features of data. The more the machine learns, the more sophisticated it becomes. Over the years, the images and videos too have become increasingly grotesque. Images of flowers, chairs, people, roads have slowly turned into human anatomy, porn, accident scenes, people being burnt alive, human decapitations, and other stark images of different causes of violated bodies. Because machines don't have a moral compass, they do not filter or process what is appropriate to ask and what kind of harm this potentially creates for the person translating the information. For example, one annotator shared how she was thrown aback when the machine asked her what human flesh tastes like. She said, initially, it was all fun because there was more money on annotating. You can chat with the chatbot, like, tell me how to prepare tea, how to clean the house, such things. Then over time, it will give you a question. Describe cannibalism. You have to put yourself in the shoes of the chatbot and chat with it in that topic that you have been given. It tells you, explain to me, what does the flesh of a human taste like? Can you boil it? Can you fry human meat? You have to explain how a body is mutilated, how to kill, how can I remove the skin? And in an hour or so, we do about 200 videos. 7 out of 10 videos are graphic and violent. And yeah, that's what we deal with every day. End quote. So she also describes a horrific video of a mother violently ending her child's life. The annotator stopped the work when she realized, or at least suspected, that her job was to train the chatbot to help it answer online users about such topics. Some annotators have even done the work for 18 hours straight while pregnant. These annotators take on these jobs because work is hard to come by and they need to feed their families. The Lireko Qhobela documentary, which is where I got this documentary info from, informs us that it is the job of the annotator to categorize the harmful content and tag it from a list ranging from human exploitation to suicide. This is also done so that the harmful content is flagged before it reaches the public online. On the flip side then, some of the annotators see this as good work. They see themselves as the most important part of AI. They see themselves as heroes because they remove the things that can potentially harm children, and therefore people at home will have safe content to consume. Despite this, the job has also been reported to give workers nightmares, anxiety, and low mood. And in response to that, some employers have allowed them 30 minutes of therapy once a month. Yeah, this is a rather low number, of course, of contact time for psychological intervention, especially one that addresses this type of consistent secondary exposure to violence. One annotator shared that her therapist told her to look at funny videos to help her replace the memories of what she sees online. Now, however well-meaning the therapist's suggestions, they were not very helpful. And I think this is because unlike the post-traumatic stress experience from actual exposure to violence, whether from war, sexual assault, or mugging, this particular trauma is vicarious and therefore removed from the physical body. And it may also require an embodied process as opposed to artificially replacing grotesque digital images with more funny and pleasant ones. I think this is where, I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole, but I think this is where the creative arts can then come in as an embodied practice, trying to, interact with this vicarious trauma. Some Kenyan annotators receive $2 per month, which is less than $20 paid in the US for 8 to 12 hours of work, according to this documentary. I now quote again from the documentary. Part of the problem is that these big tech companies outsource from Africa and other historically vulnerable sites like the Philippines, India, and Colombia because it is cheaper, end quote, and easier to hide the backwork of AI. There's also very little job security in these jobs because one day you could be working for an AI company, the next day, without notice, they no longer operate in the region and therefore you don't have work. The companies which are referenced here by the documentary are Remote Tasks, Scale AI in Silicon Valley, Majorel in Luxembourg, Teleperformance in France, TikTok in the US and Singapore, and ByteDance in Beijing, China. This Kenyan case for me asks the question, how do we respond to AI-induced traumas in Africa? Or replaced by Phillips, Adam, and Salter, how do people in conditions of oppression navigate the pathogenic environments that they are forced to inhabit? According to recent data from the World Health Organization in 2023, approximately 66 million people in Africa suffer from depressive disorders, and about 54 million live with anxiety disorders. Together, these affect approximately 8 to 10% of the continent's population, underscoring the significant burden of mental health issues in the region. These stats I'm getting from Wikipedia. As previously mentioned, literature highlights the various ways in which AI has been making impact and argues the need to understand the impact and scope of AI anxiety, including the human and their psychological adoption of it. But I want to keep focusing on Africa because a quick Google search on AI-related suicides in Africa shows results of a host of Euro-American reports as evidence that the harm caused by AI chatbots is attended to over there. So all the work goes there. This kind of violence experienced in the West is quickly met with online newspaper postings, research labs that have now coined the term AI psychosis, and inspires a temptation from the rest of the world to busy itself with the same issue. It is here Kopano Ratelle's thoughts on Euro-American psychology remind us of how those who are teaching, learning, and experiencing psychology often do so from Euro-American perspectives, regardless of their own context. According to him, the field of psychology is one of the last ones to radically respond to a decolonial call. As students, teachers, and practitioners, he invites us to engage with how the long history of how psychology was used to subdue and erase people's sense of self and development beyond what is regarded acceptable by so-called international bodies of psychology. I think I read that sentence. So I use this Kenyan case, and if I find others, I'll use those as well, to investigate what kinds of questions we should be asking instead. Although I care about AI-related suicide and other mental disorders that follow this industrial revolution globally, I'm also curious about the collective damage it does here at home, Africa. This, for me, is part of the backstage, the parts of the performance that go unnoticed. How I see it performance of AI in the backstage and how it implicates well-being is directly related to power, aesthetics, and psychopolitics, where the energy of one's mind is used to feed the capitalist system. So what does the performance of AI do in the context of mental health and other sectors? Yes. Linking Goffman's front stage and backstage, I now turn to the ideas of Jacques Rancière, Politics of Aesthetics, which propose the idea that power operates through what can be seen, said, and felt. And since AI presents in particular ways in the front stage, it is more likely to push an agenda that favors a particular kind of political experience. Rancière speaks about a system which uses aesthetics and art as psychologically powerful ways to distribute the sensible. The sensible here refers to our senses, what is allowed to be seen, said, and felt. He states, I quote, "The distribution of the sensible reveals who can have a share in what is common to the community based on what they do and on the time and space in which this activity is performed. Having a particular occupation thereby determines the ability or inability to take charge of what is common to the community. It defines what is visible or not in a common space endowed with a common language." End quote. For the AI annotators, their occupation relegates them to the backstage, therefore rendering them invisible by a system that parades progressiveness. This, one might argue, is how AI participates in a distribution of the sensible, where the agenda does not foreground the difficult stories. Without further interrogation, AI as an agent that distributes the sensible ends up determining which African resources, emotions, narratives, and bodies are rendered visible or remain unseen, therefore reproducing colonial legacies of misrecognition and erasure. The psychological cost of this regime is arguably profound and can reactivate collective traumas embodied in histories of enslavement, colonialism, and racial capitalism. So the aesthetic of AI invites us to think about the psychopolitics, which steer attention away from the impact of it, or of AI on people's well-being, and instead directs it towards the politically sensible AI, i.e. capitalist pursuits and other popular trends. Art in Rancière's delineation is able to distribute the sensible in three ways. It does so through depicted signs like books, films, posters, visual arts. That's the first. The second, the split reality of the theater, and the third, rhythm of a dance chorus. The fourth way, which I think amalgamates the other three, is, of course, AI. AI has managed to capture most forms of audio and visual media and is easily accessible to anyone at any time for any use. These four forms demonstrate the relationship between aesthetics and politics, and how aesthetics exists within a political climate which influence how and why the work is made, read, and interpreted. Now, I've done a little thing here. I call it an illegal citation. So I was trying to put my thoughts in Rancière's thoughts. So I sort of like, square bracketed so that I could, yeah. So here's a quote, which is kind of from Rancière, but also me. So this amalgamation of AI is political because on the one hand, it separates the world of artistic imitation from the world of vital concerns and political social grandeur. On the other hand, its hierarchical organization, in particular, words and images from the internet, content videos, the work that happens in the stage or the backstage, forms an analogy with the social political order. With the triumph of AI and its permutations like machine learning, deep learning, natural language processing, etc., an entire well-ordered distribution of sensory experiences prevails. End quote. Good. It redirects the focus to which Rancière highlights concerning the debate about the autonomy of art versus the submission of politics, or said differently, the autonomy of AI versus submission to politics. In this regard, Rancière sits between Goffman's front stage and backstage and the pursuit of African psychology. Although I argue that mental health in Africa should be prioritized when developing AI systems and at the same time lament the ongoing environmental damage, that these systems continue to create, I also propose a reimagination of frameworks and research methods in order to better understand how we might solve African problems. If AI performs, as per the title of my presentation, it also implies that it has an ability to act and therefore be a part of something in action. Okay, so this is where I try to put all of these things together. Kessie and Bonzair challenge my initial framing of backstage and front stage. This I discovered a few days ago, actually, so it's very fresh. They challenge my framing of backstage and front stage because they call for a rethinking of how we produce psychological knowledge in order to move it away from, quote, colonial ways of representing and working with the other, as decolonization deeply implicates the psychological. Psychology in Africa should therefore prioritize curricula and research agendas that draw on alternative philosophical principles emerging from African cultures and experiences, but also those that challenge asocial and ahistorical thinking in favor of a socially just agenda, end quote. In line with Hontonji, Moll, 2002, proposes that African psychology be preoccupied with African experiences using every credible psychology tool to understand psychology in Africa. A few days ago, as I said, I realized that while Goffman's Euro-American dramaturgy is useful in delineating how AI performs, more African indigenous theater frameworks might provide different ways of how we think about the performance of AI in Africa. These artistic and cultural frameworks might illuminate ways to explore things like policy, psychological practices, and ethical guidelines for the use of AI in Africa. These theatrical forms might borrow from cultural practices of ritual dance, oral storytelling, and the lessons and imagery of proverbs, for example. In some cases, the performance of African cultural practices integrate both the so-called backstage and front stage, in that everyone is part of the experience. So there is no sense of something happening in secret in some cases. For example, the grandmother who gathers her children for a story, her audience witness her as both narrator and actor, improviser and caregiver, or the Dilwe of Zambia that integrate the arts and involves all those attending to be a part of the burial ritual. In other words, the dramaturgies may be useful for exploring more African indigenous approaches because ethics vary from culture to culture. This also brings into the conversation the role of African psychologies and integrated healing art practices. Of course, the Kenyan case calls for ethical guidelines, and even they too have to center Africa. According to Ede Ibijola and Ogonko, 2023, of the 11 overarching ethical principles that guide AI, namely transparency, justice and fairness, non-maleficence, responsibility, privacy, beneficence, freedom and autonomy, trust, sustainability, dignity, and solidarity, it is important to note that none of the guidelines reviewed was developed in or for African contexts. This points to the fact that the global AI ethics debate is being shaped without Africa in mind. The underlying moral tradition behind the ethical principles shaping this debate therefore emerge from non-African contexts, while the AI application and tools will potentially be based in African contexts. End quote. I made it sound like small words. It therefore becomes important to be concerned with ethics and good practice, which concern themselves with epistemic just AI and not just good intentions. I think there's a serious danger in advancing AI technology without really thinking about the impact of it on the environment and the psyche. To this, Kasi argues that Ubuntu may be a viable framework for responding to the ethical qualms associated with AI development in Africa, because it considers the voices and context of people affected by it. The philosophy of Ubuntu is rooted in communality, human dignity, and relational accountability. This means any effort to develop AI in Africa falls short if it does not mitigate the harm caused by the large computing and infrastructure required to run the AI technology. Ubuntu and other African indigenous frameworks, like those within theatre and performance, need to perhaps maybe take center stage if issues related to trauma, both past, present, and future, are to be addressed. I think I'll end it here. Thank you very much for your attention. And like I said, it's a conversation. Yeah, so this is how far I've gotten with like all these moving parts as I think about AI and centering it within my work and the context. And yeah, I look forward to your feedback. Hope I can answer some of your questions. If I can't, we just yeah, throw to each other and see where that goes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lireko. A lot to unpack. I've just made my own a bit of kind of like a important point that I heard from this presentation that started from a couple of thoughts that you gave, and you've talked about how AI can be a transformative tools for health. And also you spoke about the AI cannot exist without human. So somehow we need human in order for AI to exist. So there is what we call interconnectedness between human and technology. And then you move by talking about environmental damage that the AI does, and concluding with Ubuntu, the framing of AI within the African epistemology. So these are kind of like thoughts that came in mind. I'm not going to ask a question now, but I would like to open the floor for those who have questions so that, we can, we can actually engage with what you've presented here. Thank you. We have Olerato. Yes, wait. We have, your name is? Hawun Uli, okay. You have 1, 2, 3. And other. So can we take 4, or do you want to take the questions? Can we take them all?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So Olerato, yes, you can go ahead.
Thanks, Stephen. Well, I'm just also popping up, so I probably won't get time to hear your answer. But I think what's interesting is that AI, at least like things like these evidence that these people are annotating, we should always remember that these things are products. So I feel like the nature of them as products is going to also influence whose psychological needs are taken quite seriously, right? And also, if you think about something as a product, also you bring in the capitalistic lens into the picture, which I think also can be significantly tied to the fact that capitalism requires an exploiter and doesn't necessarily take so it requires an exploited and doesn't necessarily take the interests of the exploited very seriously. So I think that a lot of this, maybe that kind of product framing to me explains quite a lot about why those Kenyan imitators are effectively just dispensable. They're like, rather they expendable, actually, like they're there to be used, So in that sense, if you're a tool to be used, a tool is not something that people necessarily feel needs to be taken care of, at least psychologically. What seems to matter, even in the interventions of 30 minutes of therapy a month or whatever, it's like that intervention to me seems to be more an intervention of keeping you going and actually caring about your well-being. So I think those kind of considerations around, just how unforgiving capitalism is to the very person it exploits, I think gives I think an additional layer to why people are not looking to the backstage, as you're saying. And I appreciate your framing, contrary to Kes and policy. I appreciate your framing because that is the colonial situation. The fact that the people behind the curtain don't matter. It's what is the show that matters. So yeah. Great work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ole.
Thanks. I have a comment and a question. The comment is that I really enjoy your presentation because I think you highlight and bring to the front and to the fore a lot of the negative aspects with AI. I find that there's a disproportionate amount of attention being paid to the positive aspects of AI. And I think at least in your presentation, I don't know what the focus of your broader research, but I think at least here now, you highlight a lot of serious issues that are already happening. Like some of my research is things that might happen in the future, like job losses and but yeah, you're already saying this is happening in Kenya already. And I think that's really cool. My question also is about, I think, is the CCNY Junior like these people from UCT.
I don't know.
Oh,
I
think it's the CCNY Professor Lireko Qhobela.
maybe.
Anyway,
I don't know.
I wanted, my question was about them and their critique of this, and I realized that it's fresh. You said that you saw 2 days ago. So if it's still too fresh, I accept that. We can maybe talk about it afterwards. But I wondered if you could just spend some time to unpack, more about what their complaints were against you, because if I think that whole narrative about we need to reject epistemology in favor of decolonialized epistemology. That whole sort of approach. There's a lot of work that goes into saying you need something has to be decolonial. What exactly makes it? Do we have to go all the way back, and especially with something like psychology? Is statistics like, should statistics also be decolonized? Do you understand what I'm trying to say? Like, what exactly is their argument about that? Because I think Oleg made the same point. I think at the face of it, at least your approach seems to tick those boxes, to be decolonial, to question the system that's going on and to come from an African decolonized perspective. So my understanding is that they are critiquing you, and I just thought if you could just, if I'm right in my understanding, if you could say why, because I'm suspicious of those sorts of positions who tend to critique it. So no, it's got to be decolonial, or what makes it decolonial. That's all. And like I said, I appreciate that you only saw it the other day, and we were really focused on that sort of stuff. So if I must talk to you again in a week or something, that's also.
Okay.
But yes, I enjoy your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Wait, can I respond or do you have to take all the questions?
Okay, can she respond to the two, because these are quite heavy questions? Then we can move to it.
The reason I want to respond now is because I think I was a bit creative with how I was writing that portion. So with Casey and this is like a 2018 paper I read, and they're talking about psychology and epistemology, psychology in Africa and things like that. So I think reading that article challenged me to think about how I frame what I'm saying. So it's not that they were saying I should, no. Just in case that's how it came across. And I was basically just saying, oh, actually, maybe
actually you made it seem like they were.
I'm realizing that I wrote it like that. I should say they inspired, perhaps, instead of saying they challenged. But yeah, that's what I meant. I just meant like they made me think about, instead of like the Euro-American framing of theater, maybe I could think about an Afrocentric, what an African performance or theater space, like a ritual, whatnot, how that might explain a potential forms of AI.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Once again, my name is Halu.
How would you?
Yes. Thank you so much, Daryl, for the presentation. It's quite thought-provoking and interesting. I do have a question. Let's assume, and we'll put this question in this way: if AI is both a protagonist and an antagonist against humanity, and an antagonist against human progress and human ideation, then which framework do we deploy to combat the harm that it brings? I heard you speaking about maybe as an ideology and as a philosophy, do you put that maybe as a combatant, or do you have an alternative framework, do you have an alternative option that you put forth to combat against AI as an antagonist against humanity and human progress?
Okay, thank you.
There was a question, Azza, yes?
Thank you very much, Lireko. Very interesting presentation you gave us, and also thought-provoking and disturbing and really quick. I mean, it took us on a version of all of us. At least there's still people like you who can challenge the harm that we are experiencing every day. That you talked about the adaptation in Kenya and the adaptation generally in the world. It's just a amazing thing. And it is something that's actually going to be worse, I believe. It's never going to be better, in terms of workload, in terms of exposure, because the more sophisticated the technology becomes, the more real the damage is. And it is one of the future of work, if we say like what jobs are going to be affected. Jobs are not going to be, jobs are going to be affected, old-fashioned jobs probably, but there are new emerging jobs, right? So like long time ago, we didn't have something called computer engineering or computer or coding or whatever. These kind of jobs were not existing, but now they are existing and they're coming up in the forefront. And the idea, the aspiration, if you want to be a rich person, you have to be in that business, otherwise you are not. So creativity is also taken to a different level, how to be as humans, how to be creative, how we can be creative in supporting the technology in both ways, supporting the development of technology, but also we want the creativity of how to manage the technology and how to mitigate any risk that comes out of it and how could we heal, because it's just becoming too much. And I really like the way you framed it. But what I saw that, you promised, and I because probably it's the time, you didn't touch on it, is the idea of data centers, you talked about it, how data centers, how are you bringing in your work data centers? Because I know also there's a lot of violence when it comes to data centers, because like, for example, like as Miga is working on like how it impacts the environment, how it impacts the people, how it displays the people, it takes water, it takes energy, all of that. That's the huge field of its own, And even when we went last week to the symposium, there's even more problems of, especially in the case of Africa, and if you want to talk about Africa as a collective, like if a data center is built in South Africa, which is supposed to be a data center that serves all Africa, to what extent actually the mobility is allowed, because in this case, if you want a data center that works for all Africa, then you need to allow mobility, you need to allow integration, you need to allow a lot of things that doesn't exist right now at the moment. And actually people could argue like South Africa is not the best place to build a data center for Africa, because of all the, the politics of the country, how the country is closed, especially for Africa. That's why it's very challenging, because there's no regional integration generally in Africa. That's not this. The transportation, all those kind of things that are important, and that could ease some of the violence. We are connected, we build our technology and our data centers according to our own needs and how we envision Africa, being, like, what's that looking at? How, how we as Africans benefit from these data centers, instead of creating jobs, instead of building the technology itself, because data centers are all things that are important and just assembled here in wherever it's built, but it's not being owned by African states. So how do we, what's your take on that, because it's something that you mentioned, I'd be very interested in what you're going to say about it.
Could you summarize your question? Is it that how is my work fitting into the doctor's?
Yes, I mean, you mentioned that you want to talk about data centers, but I didn't get that point. Now your work is going to talk to that.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Lireko. I enjoyed the presentation. It's good to hear something in a language that I understand, which is theatre and the arts. So I have two questions. You mentioned towards the beginning of your presentation that Africa is a place with low resources, or little resources. But I'm not sure that's the case because we have the largest population of young people in the world. And so, I mean, we have a lot of resources in the form of young people then. It's not that humans are only resources. So I'm just wondering, I guess I'm also wondering in connection to that point is that, do we have to use AI? I'm not thinking that we should be left behind the rest of the world, but if we have, so we have this problem with how we're going to implement AI and how we're going to, I guess, harness AI for our own benefits. But we also have a parallel problem about about unemployment and all these young people who can't find jobs. And I'm sure there are young people who don't care about AI, just like me. It's not a young person, but I think many people in this room care about AI, and I don't give shits about AI. So I'm sure there are young people who are like that. So is it really a problem of Africa being a place with low resources? Or is it a problem of us wanting to do what the rest of the world is doing, or not wanting to be left behind? Or is it a problem of us not wanting to do what we need to do for our own progress? I don't know. That's one part of my question. Oh. That's my question, but I don't know if it makes sense. And then the other part is, you did, as I said, you mentioned data centers and the environment. And so I'm curious to hear more about how you will bring the environment into your work. Not data centers in particular, but the environment, like what data centers is doing to our environment. Because every time we have an election in South Africa, for example, nobody talks one word about the climate or the environment. Yet we continue to vote for people, even though they don't say anything about it. So I'm just wondering where that fits into your research, how it matters.
Yes. Yes.
Oh, wow. Those are big questions. I think Dr. Banwe says, if you don't have an answer, it's like, I really don't have, I don't know. So the thing on low resources, I think, again, maybe it was also I think maybe you're referring to, I could be wrong. I was citing Fafa saying that Africa scores low on AI readiness. Is that the one that you were, no?
you use the word low resource settings,
Okay,
the phrase.
okay. Well,
But it's fine.
yeah, no, I think I mean, the way you phrased your question, yes, obviously, no, we're not low resource, but I think it was more, I'm starting to find it here now. It's like, it was here.
Sorry,
But
the way I understood what you're talking about, like internet connectivity and infrastructure.
yeah, it was more of a like an access
Yeah.
issue, not so much the making of, for example, like, with cell phones, there's like the resource to make it, we have it, but they resell it to us and then it's expensive. But it was more about the access to infrastructure, if that makes sense. Thank you, Asa. No, you don't, and just the environment, honestly, I don't know. Like I said, this is like quite preliminary, which answers your question as well about how my work fits in. I'm at the beginning of trying to, I think, so what happened was a month ago when I was in Rwanda for the Codestria conference, I think I was bombarded with a lot of unlearning in terms of just how I think about the kinds of like citational justice they're called, yeah. So like, whose voice am I including from the content? And so I think for me, it's a very slow work of questioning my field, not because it's, violent, I hope not, but the way in which we're taught how to be therapists, drama therapists, particularly, interests me. So I'm not at the point where I can say, oh, this is how I might involve data centers and whatnot in this way. Because also I think the work that I do, unfortunately, is very hands-on, like it's person. I work with the people, and AI is like scalable, and the amounts of people that are working as annotators, there are a lot of them. So, it would mean employing, I don't know how many therapists, not just drama therapists or creative art therapists, but like just clinical psychologists and whatnot. I don't know how to scale that, with AI as a backdrop. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, like I think I also mentioned that there's text-based drama therapy, which is again the double-edged sword. I think I personally don't like AI also, right? And I remember, no, okay, I don't like AI. I mean, I like it, but I'm just cautious to be excited about it because of the other side of the story, which is the planet is suffering, and it can become very existential for me, where it's like this text-based drama therapy, we're helping people using the interface of, laptops and cell phones, text, images, story, movies, blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, the amount of data you put on is the amount of energy it requires to cool down the system with natural resources like water and, all those things. So it's like, I don't know how to reconcile those contradictions myself. Yeah, it's hard. So anyway, have I kind of responded? Not really. I mean, it's me saying I actually don't.
Understand, but it's like a conversation more than to respond to a question because it's very important, And it's something, for me, this is the part of AI that people are not, the hidden labor, the backstage labor of AI that no one talks about it, and it's very important to bring it to light, and from your own perspective, drama therapy, I imagine that there's a lot of exciting work that can be done, and it's not like, I mean, we don't have to care about it, but we care about it. It's very important to care about it because it's not something that can pass by. I mean, even if as much as we can be conscious of not using artificial intelligence, it's using us. Even if we are not using it, it's using us. And it's a very important thing, and I think it's a very good point of where to start to see how would we mitigate and how would we deal with this paradox of AI being the good and AI the evil. Or I think it's very we have to do this, yes.
Thank you so much, Azza. Yes.
Want to, and then I think we're over time also.
Yes, so this, I just said, just to be polite, I would like to ask, because we're supposed to finish at 2, we're just going to extend with a few minutes for those who want to stay, and then we can take Zareen and your question, and then we can respond to.
Can I respond to
Maybe
that?
respond to that
Yeah.
one, yes.
Okay, so I think the question is about frameworks. I think, what alternative frameworks? I think towards the end, again, these are half-baked ideas. Towards the end, I was thinking more about what an African theatrical configuration, how that might help us maybe begin to think differently about how AI might perform. Because right now, AI is performing front and back. And people at the back are doing what they're doing, and people on the front are doing that. Whereas maybe with more African, again, and this is testament to the success of colonialism, that I can't even think of an example of an African. I mean, I mentioned 2 there, but I was just sort of grabbing, grasping at straws so that I could have an example. But the one so I wrote a paper with my partner on funeral rites in Zambia, called the Deal. And we were sort of like unpacking the ways in which everybody is involved in that performance, if you call it that, and exploring how the arts are integrated instead of separated. So he's a music therapist, I'm a drama therapist, but I think in our Africa, the way we experience the arts is quite integrated. You can't have story without song, without dance, an embodied expression of it or whatnot. So those frameworks for me are interesting to investigate. I'm yet to discover them. Things like African proverbs. Also, I would have to what African proverbs could capture at least an imagery of what a healthy society might look like, for example. And also, I think your question made me think about, and this is a conversation I was having on the side some time back, around textures of violence and how AI is it has quite a patriarchal, the texture of violence that comes with patriarchy is it's forceful. It's like it destructs, it destroys, it sort of like makes a mark, it plants its flag, and you must, succumb to it and whatnot. So that kind of violence is quite, sorry to use terms masculine and feminine, but anyway, masculine. Sorry, I'm not trying to offend anyone, but it's quite destructive. And then I was thinking, again, I'm at the beginning of reading people like Che Ganta Diop, who also introduces the idea of matriarchal societies and how that texture of violence is different, where the matriarchal, if you will, matriarchy violence, there's still violence, but instead of destruction, it's more concerned with rebuilding or care and whatnot. So in terms of frameworks, I'm sort of trying to think with more African lenses to see, what models could we create for ways that can inform policy and ethics and whatnot. And they would have to be quite context specific, obviously, because Africa is not a country and we all have different expressions of culture and things like that. Yeah.
Okay, yes, Zareen, and then just brief, then we can also respond briefly. Yes.
On the note of data centers and the thing that you're touching upon, I think of Rob Nixon's slow violence, which is the slow degradation of the environment in the pursuit of development and such, and the toxicities that leak into the earth, and then they're not immediate. It's like the next generation that suddenly has all kinds of cancers and things like that. And I think maybe there's something in it in the way that this generation does the dirty work of doing the annotations, doing the private conversations with the chatbots and such, that you don't necessarily see effects now, but maybe in 5-10 years or so that's present. So I think in some ways there's some kind of overlap that you're touching upon, even if you don't yet know how to articulate it. And then also interesting that you mentioned Rwanda, because I was thinking of Rwanda because that's very good my field work. And mental health is so taboo in many instances in Rwanda, especially because it's so very much linked to the history of the genocide against the Tutsis. And in many ways, their mental health is integral to keeping the country in its state of stability. It becomes both this like balancing act between having a healthy population, but not a too protected population. Otherwise, you run the risk of people really confronting their emotions in a way that may not be desirable by the state. And so then I guess to that point of, Africa is not a country, when we're speaking to like policymakers, all these like reports that say things like Africa is not AI ready, they provincialize Africa eventually. And sometimes we also run the risk in trying to create this like full Africa perspective. And it really is in the nitty-gritty on the ground work where you'll be talking about populations that aren't necessarily going to be picked up by like UNDP or even the African Union or anything like that. And so, yeah, I'd be curious to see where you go with your work. And like, I think honing in on these like very specific instances, like I think Kenya is will be super interesting. So there wasn't really a question.
No, thank you.
Thank you, Zari.
I'm studying for programming mental health in conversations about AI. And I'm saying this because a few years ago we had a symposium in my department, I'm from the Department of Psychology, so it's just started now. And one of the studies that were done about honors students was about how we could make mental health more accessible, given the situation in our country. And I know that that's the case in the rest of our region. So thanks for thinking so beautifully about it, because I found that actually your initial thought about it allowed you to think about AI in an interesting way. Coincidentally, Zaya and Casey in that paper are not against the idea that we might draw on existing knowledges. They propose that we throw everything that is psychological, that is about to machine here. But like Augustine, they encourage us to think about how the tools that we receive fit for purpose where we are, and where they make no sense, to think of what our knowledges might actually offer the very things that those tools are meant to do wherever they were designed. So I will share with you one of our colleagues who visited us at the hub from Senegal. She designed a diagnostic tool that drew on folklore, and it was illustrated in ways that made sense to everybody who was using it, whatever part of that country was, whether they were in the deep rural areas, they could use the diagnostic tool. So I find that kind of work was done by Black feminists very helpful, and it might be helpful to think through exactly what you drew out for us. I think the other stuff, maybe I will just talk to you afterwards, but yeah, thank you for. I never thought about the idea of the violence that people experience while training these models, and how the lackluster performative interventions that they do, 30 minutes thing, and maybe the very tools that they're designing could, as much as I hate the idea of it, might actually be addressed through something like the app you were talking about. Maybe that's not less about a machine going wild at us, but something else that we might develop in the same way as this professor from Senegal has done. Maybe we can after that with you.
Please, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. On this note, I think we can close our presentation. Thank you so much, Lireko.
Thank you, everyone.